All right, and we're live. Hey, everybody who happens to be watching this right now or the rebroadcast. My name's Joran Oppelt. I'm the founder of Illustrious, and I definitely don't do these live streams nearly as often as I should. Um, and I'm excited to do this one today. And I'm even more excited by the fact that I have an accountability partner that's helping me do these live streams with more regularity, and that is my guest and colleague today, Sumaya Owens. Say hello.
Hi, thanks for having me here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sumaya is my marketing partner. She helps Illustrious Consulting with our marketing and PR and social media, all kinds of things. And do you want to say a little bit about Present Moment Media and what you do?
Sure, thanks for asking.
Yeah.
I'm the founder of Present Moment Media. We are a digital marketing agency focused on uplifting the voices of change makers, and we primarily work with brands interested in social impact. And we're really honored to be a part of Illustrious and be a part of their vision, and we're really excited to be here and supporting you and holding you accountable for your live stream today.
Yeah, I just know that is one thing that is it's on my calendar to do all the time, and it always falls off. Something always gets bumped, to the top of the priority list, and these things get bumped down. But I think it's just super important to get on sometimes. This, to me, is the real value in social media, to be able to connect with people. Not just in a one-to-many, like, hey, here's how my day was kind of thing, but also conversationally, and to host conversations. And with that in mind, we're broadcasting live today to Facebook in our Amplified group, in our executive coaching group, Amplified. We're broadcasting to LinkedIn and also to our YouTube channel. So all of those three platforms, you will be able to see this stream, and you'll also be able to leave comments. So if you are watching, leave us a comment, and we'll try to address them. So yeah, it's important for me to kind of get on here with regularity and have conversations with people, and because Illustrious, a lot of what the work we do, we can't talk about. Interestingly, like we can't talk about what clients we work with. So I think a lot of my friends and family just have a real abstract idea of what I do for a living, and they wouldn't be able to tell you what I do. So the more opportunity I get to kind of talk about concrete things that I do for work, the more that kind of helps me connect with people and helps people understand a little bit more about what I do.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate what you shared about how having conversations is an important part of the work you're trying to do in your marketing and social media, because that's definitely present for me whenever I talk about marketing or sales. A big part of my vision is building authentic relationships, and I think that social media can sometimes be one-sided conversation, when you're just posting and maybe you don't have the engagement or comments you want, or vice versa. Maybe you're engaging with someone else's content, but when you can have a conversation with someone, I think that's where magic can really happen. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, I have a few questions for you, and you were talking about feeling like that. Some of the work you do is maybe more difficult to explain, or that it's maybe more theoretical. But I know one of the types of content that you regularly share is about music, and using music as a metaphor in the work that you do. And so I was wondering if you could share an example of a music metaphor with us.
Yeah, and music metaphors are a part of what we do because I am a musician and because that is part of my past. I recorded and toured and performed and produced other people's bands and did all kinds of things in the my music career, my past life as a musician. So it's a language I speak. Even when we get into the um, kind of four flows of facilitation or the more Jungian archetypes of facilitators. I really am rooted in how things travel in waves, or how things are things respond or land with an audience, or how you're listening, or there's interplay or improvisation, like just all of those things that are learned behaviors or traits as a musician are things that I kind of carry forward into the coaching and the facilitation and the consulting work. So it's a language I speak, and that's why when we speak in musical metaphor, that that feels so loud, that feels so front and center, because because it's a comparison I make with clients that I work with, that I've spent my time on the stage. Now it's my time to kind of come back behind the scenes and push them out on stage a little bit, push them out in front of the crowd, and teach them how to work the microphone, and teach them how to stay cool under the lights, and all of those things that I can that value I can provide for them is all kind of in music speak, if you will. And I see we have a listener, which is great, a viewer, which is great. Please leave us a comment. Let us know you're watching, wherever you're watching from. Tell us how you're doing today. Sumaya just asked me if I could share a metaphor, a musical metaphor that we use in the business, that we use with Illustrious. And the one I can think of today is the life cycle of a business. And that's a model that is, old as dirt. It was, I think, probably in the 50s or 60s. The Adizes model was the most prominent. Oh, it says Facebook user says hi. It just says Facebook user. Unfortunately, it doesn't say your name, Facebook user. But thank you for saying hello. Maybe you can tell us who you are in the comments, unless you're trying to be anonymous. I don't know. Oh, and Seamus is watching on LinkedIn. Thanks, bro. Thanks for watching. Well, Seamus is a saxophone player who used to be in a band with me called Auditorium. He's also my brother-in-law, and so he's going to appreciate the conversation today for sure. So this old life cycle of a business model that comes kind of from the 60s, that was popularized by Adizes, and then later by Tony Robbins. Like Tony Robbins has a business mastery program that kind of co-opted the Adizes model, and it talks in detail about the stages of a business from startup to teenager, from birth to teenager to adolescent and toddler, and then you get into like zone of maturity, zone of maximization, and then into aging, and then eventually institutionalization and death. And so you can point to this life cycle and say, my business is at such and such a stage. If you're a startup, you're really at the birth stage. You really aren't kind of standing on your own. But then that moment that you have, that first moment you kind of take risk and involve other people in the business, you really are moving to that toddler stage. Teenager stage has typically been when the organization, the business has a little cash now, and they're making some maybe not so wise decisions. They're kind of, they've got the Lamborghini and they're maybe crashing it into a tree. The teenager stage is where the business makes some mistakes with staffing or resources or spending or strategy, you name it. But that's what that teenager stage is for. As those of us who are parents know, that's when you're supposed to make those mistakes. And if you get through that stage, you move into that zone of maturity, which is that stabilized spending, stabilized resources. You've got a leadership structure in place that's really scalable. So that's that topmost part of the curve on the life cycle, and then back down into aging as the structures begin to wear out, resources, platforms, systems begin to be outdated. Institutionalization takes you into like what even is this business anymore? Like, are we really providing value? Are we really providing a service to anybody anymore? Are we even connecting with our audience, or are we isolating ourselves and just spinning our wheels? And then death. Sometimes businesses end or dissolve. So that's the kind of the Adizes or Robbins model. And what I did was I just laid on the labels of, like a rock band, so you may start out at singer-songwriter, and you might be sitting in your bedroom writing these songs and coming up with these ideas. You have in your mind what the business might look like or what the stage show might be, right? You've got the whole lighting schematic in your brain, but you don't have the team to execute it yet, right? It's just all startup. And then moving into that kind of garage band, like anybody who's a musician knows, like as soon as you get like convince somebody to be a bass player and a drummer or a keyboard player in your band, like that, those people are placing an immense amount of trust in you. They're following your vision. They maybe like the songs you write. They're moved by them. They believe in what you're trying to do. And so that garage band phase really is that toddler phase where you've got a bunch of people now that are taking risks together in a business. And, you're kind of prototyping what it looks like with your first team. And a lot of small businesses they just kind of live there, like they might occasionally get a cash flow bump to teenager and like, oh my God, we made all this money this quarter. What are we going to do with it? Let's reinvest in X or Y, right? But most small businesses just kind of stay at that toddler teenager phase, and that's fine. But if you're constantly growing and expanding and adding on staff, then in the rock band life cycle, we're talking about now the drummer's got a drum tech, right? The drummer has somebody who now, as you're touring and taking the band on the road, you've got somebody who's setting up the drum rug for you and setting up the drums hardware for you. And you've got a guitar tech who's tuning your instrument for you and handing it to you. You've got this crew now that you're caring for, and that's working for you, but also believes in your vision and is getting a paycheck at the same time.
Right.
So that moving from that garage band to kind of like touring band is a really, really important step for a business.
Well, and let's take a moment to talk a little bit about how you use this model in working with clients, because I know you had shared a blog post a while ago about musical instruments and which musical instrument are you, and that was really interesting to me in talking about how the different members of the band kind of communicate or engage or cooperate with each other. And this is a model that I believe can be very complementary to that idea in terms of you're still working within this musical framework, but instead of thinking about the team, you're thinking about just the business overall, and like which stage of the business are you at, depending on whether you're a singer-songwriter or you're a headliner. So now that we have a basic concept of what this is, can you tell us a little bit about how you use this in working with clients?
Sure. Yeah. I know that in one case, all it took was for us to show this model to a client and ask the questions: where are you on this life cycle? Where are your clients on the life cycle? And where is your competition on the life cycle? Just that set of three questions using this model was enough for them to really radically rethink their value proposition. And they were kind of at a crossroads thinking, well, we're going to sell to this, we're going to accept this offer. This had this organization who was going to offer to buy them out and buy their IP and buy their list and all these things. But when we showed them this model, they realized, oh, our clients are way back here and we're way over here on the curve, and our competition is, way over here and saying things that the clients want to hear. And they just realized that they needed to kind of rethink their positioning and refine their message a little bit. And they doubled down, and instead of accepting that offer to buy them out or to buy their IP, they actually doubled down and recommitted to a big event that year, a big conference, hosting a big conference that year to kind of reposition themselves in the marketplace. So it can be a catalyzing model to start a conversation with an executive or a leadership team, if there's just confusion about where they are in their life cycle, or whether they think they're at the end or they think they're at, somewhere, just to sense check it and say, are you really here? Where are you really? Most recently, I used this with a team who were kind of moving from startup, they were 8 years old, had been a startup, but now we're kind of getting into, we've got an executive team that's in place. Our CEO is kind of stepping down and letting the executive team lead. They're really experiencing the growing pains of things like the founder syndrome and, getting the team equipped with the right tools to make the decisions within the business. And what we discovered when we put this model on the wall and had a conversation about it was that a lot of the direct reports, a lot of the wider organization still thought of the company as a startup, even though they were 8 years old, even though they had all this funding, even though they were all set to go and scaling and growing and doing all of these things. And, there's still this kind of punk, I called it, the Green Day kind of garage band DIY mentality within the organization of the people who wanted to continue to think, act, and behave like a startup, and didn't want to grow up, didn't want to mature into those more stable leadership structures, which everybody understood and everybody understands. That's the startup culture is like the Wild West. Anything goes. You think of the foosball tables and the whatever, but you can have that and stable business structures and an actual org chart that that people are accountable to at the same time. So they were going through the pains of realizing the executive team knew that they were further up the life cycle than the rest of the direct reports did. So then immediately the priority became, okay, now how do we tell this story? How do we make the entire business feel safe? And as we grow along this curve, realizing we're no longer Green Day, we've got to act a little more like the Rolling Stones. We've got to get out there and sing Satisfaction every night, even though we don't want to. We've got to act a little bit more like a legacy or touring band. But then how do we preserve that DIY punk ethos in our values and in the way we communicate with each other, right? And not let it affect our business systems and the way we run business or make decisions or, show up with clients or on discovery. It's just businesses have to act a little more mature. And it's keeping them feeling like you can still be, that you can still be Green Day in your heart. We can still be a startup at heart. We can still do fun things, but we've got to grow. We've got to mature as an organization. And here's what that looks like. Here's what we're excited to build with you together, right? So the effort immediately turned into how are we going to tell the story about how we grow along this curve together. So that's a couple examples of where this model has been useful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you incorporating this element of ethos into, how you describe that approach of scaling a business, because my experience of working in corporate and, from what I hear from my clients and colleagues, they have similar experiences where, the larger a company scales, sometimes it feels like there's this loss of, the company culture, the company values, the company ethos. communication breaks down, people are having more difficult relationships, maybe there's founder syndrome happening, and it seems like the more and more you scale, that can become more and more apparent. And so, how do you maintain the ethos as you scale? So that's a great way to frame it. I appreciate you sharing that. So as a business owner or founder or leader, why is this important? And, how can this be helpful to someone who's in leadership, who's maybe watching today?
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned founder syndrome a couple times already, right? And I think that the further you get along the curve of the life cycle, the more risk there is for things like ego or status quo to kind of damage the way the business is operating. And I've seen that happen repeatedly too. Sometimes it's the status quo and this is the way we've always done things. And this is again, back to like, my brain is still in the garage. This is the way we did things when we were a startup. And it worked for us then, it must work for us now, which is not true at all, right? Like the stuff that got you there will not get you to where you need to be. So you've got to always be reinventing and rethinking at every stage along the cycle. But also that sense of ego that can be inflated the more successful you become, the more founders are pushed out as spokespeople or faces for the brand, the more comfortable they get speaking on podcasts and being in the public eye and being a face of the company and a mouthpiece for the company. As you shift into those more legacy structures and you say, okay, we don't need you to be brand ambassador anymore. We've actually got we've got a chief evangelism officer that's going to do that now, right? Sometimes that's hard for founders to hear. And I think similarly, when you get to a point of success in a musical group, you'll hear the stories of the sound changing, the songwriting changing, and it's because there's other voices involved. Maybe they need to recreate hits. They need to kind of stay where they're at on the charts. So we've got to crank out, a lot more hits, that are going to keep us fed and keep us paid. And that's when you involve people like amazing songwriting teams or production teams or collaborators into the mix to really craft amazing songs that are going to really activate people's hearts and be popular with people. And that's hard, I think, for those founders who are, or those, frontmen, lead singers, whoever, who are like, but I've always written the songs. It's my songs that people love, right? It's hard for them to kind of take a back seat and collaborate. And I think so that's kind of where that happens along the legacy line, is people really need to check their egos and allow other people to step up as leaders and collaborators. And this whole thing comes down to listening, right? That's the overarching universal essence of the music metaphor, is how much are we listening versus speaking or producing or offering ourselves. Anyone who is a master musician or a master virtuoso on their instrument, what they're really doing is listening to what's happening around them and responding. And it's true in any product innovation cycle. What you're doing is listening to the customer voice and then responding with a prototype or attempting to test or validate an idea in the business. And so within leadership, it really does also come down to how much are you allowing interplay? How much are you listening to what's happening around you? How much are you allowing empathy or the ability to kind of perceive someone else's lived experience and let that inform your decision in the business? So it really is that kind of, I always say it's the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, but you should definitely be listening more than you're speaking. You should be understanding right? More than you're executing. And so I think not only in leadership, but in music, this whole idea of listening to what's happening around you, not only in your on stage with you, with your team, with your bandmates, to create a coherent musical experience for people, but also in the marketplace, right? Are you listening to what people are wanting and then responding instead of saying, well, these are the songs I always write. These are the products we always crank out. If I just make another one, people will buy it again. That's not necessarily true. So listening has a lot to do with it. And that this can also facilitate that conversation about, like you mentioned earlier, who's playing what instrument in the band. Is that really what's appropriate as we move to this next stage? Do we really still need two drummers, or can we get down to one, right? Is it still appropriate to have one person out front singing, or do we really need to share the burden now and have a few different vocalists on rotation doing double duty? All of those conversations through that musical metaphor or lens can really help inform the direction and strategy of the business.
Great. You gave us a little overview already of the singer-songwriter and the garage band. I was wondering if you could give us a brief highlight of the headliner, which I believe you touched on a little bit. But what sticks out to me is how you describe it as settle down and get serious.
Yeah, I really do. I think it's, and it doesn't need to be serious all the time. I don't think there's, it doesn't mean you stop having fun.
Right.
I just think that the business decisions are made strategically at that point. They're not made based on how much or how little risk we're taking. They're not made out of response to crisis. They're now based on strategic decisions that are going to affect the broader organization. And you've got a team in place, right? Whether, and again, with the music analogy, whether it's you've got a manager now, you've got a publicist, you've got an agent, you've got your music publishing for the songs that you've already written and are being now played on TV commercials to consider. You've got the crew that's taking you out on the road. You've got all of these working pieces, and all these decisions need to be made with that broader ecosystem in mind. And I think that's where we are when we get into like legacy. It's really like in a team performance model. For me, that's the high performance stage. Like if you're able to get firing on all pistons, that stage of the life cycle isn't necessarily permanent. It can be elusive. You can be functioning at that point for a while and then maybe slip back into, kind of the touring band. Or you can be high functioning for a while and, at legacy, and then kind of overperform, and then, overextend into, and find yourselves at a crossroads moment in the business too. So I don't want people to think like, oh, once we reach legacy or once we reach high performance, we're done. I mean, it's very dynamic and very temporary.
Mm-hmm. And then can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by the crossroads?
Yeah, the crossroads really is that moment of organizational decision or crisis where you've got a few options on the table. Some, those options might look like continue to grow, continue to pump more money into the business. An option might be to lay some people off and streamline the crew, and get a handle on profitability. The crossroads could really look like anything. The metaphor then becomes like, what's the creative direction we want to go? Like, what kind of band or artist do we want to be in the world? What value or purpose are we putting into the world? And, how does that affect our voice and our messaging and our positioning and all of that? So the crossroads can have some real structural and operational impact. But it's also that high level, is the singer going solo, is the CEO going to now spin off and start another company, right? Did our person who, was our collaborator and longtime songwriter splinter off and start another group and take a bunch of our IP with him and start another organization over there, and now we have competition? All of these things are also things that happen at the crossroads stage. So, kind of like where we're on the left side of the curve, we're making decisions in crisis. Over on the crossroads side of the curve, on the right-hand side, we're really responding to crisis. It's how we respond to crisis. The other thing is you can slip back, and that's okay. I just want people to know that, I mentioned layoffs, and it's like I worked with a client recently who had to lay off like over 100 people. And we talked about it in the context of this model. Like we were a headlining band. We were on the road with all of those roadies and guitar techs and drum techs, and we had this big crew, and we were doing really great work in the world. But now we're not on tour anymore. And so in between tour, those guys can't work. Like you've got to let those guys go do other work in between. And it doesn't mean your value is diminished. It doesn't mean your message is diminished. It doesn't mean your work is less important. It just means you can't sustain that level of crew anymore. You can't employ that many people. So even though you might roll back from, touring headliner to club band, and you might have to tune your own guitar for a while and roll out your own drum rug for a while, it doesn't mean you won't get there again. It doesn't mean that you won't go on another tour, and you might need to hire more crew again. So again, these stages are dynamic, and just because you're slipping back doesn't mean you're falling all the way forward to death, even though, that can be what it feels like.
Mm-hmm. Well, change is inevitable in everything we do, and whenever we anticipate that, it can be helpful and supportive in, getting us to that next stage of the business or next chapter of life, whatever it may be. And, I really appreciate the way you have framed this, metaphor in a way that, people can relate to and understand kind of outside this, very otherwise kind of like dry kind of business way of thinking, right? Because I think as creative people, sometimes we need to relate to something in a more dynamic way or visual way, or sometimes just thinking about things in very business-like terms or marketing or sales terms can really shut people down, and it's hard to talk about. So I appreciate that you put this together.
Well, and you bring up a good point, because I think, as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, have I just created these metaphors and models and tools to make it more interesting for me, right? Like to keep myself more interested and engaged. And I think that's partially true. And it turns out that what I've come up with to keep myself interested has also been interesting for other people, and has also been really informative and instructive for other people. So, I don't know. I think that maybe that's just advice then for any creative. It's like, just make it interesting for you. And I think by doing that, then you create something that people may want to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. I definitely don't think you created it just for you, because in my experience working with various clients and colleagues, even just saying the word sales, people can like really shut down or feel overwhelmed. And, then when I reframe it as something that's like more creative or expressive that maybe they can relate to, then it feels like, that magic starts to happen and people start to understand and connect and feel inspired. And so I think reframing it in this way is definitely helpful. Well, thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me today.
Yeah, thanks, Sumaya. I appreciate you keeping me accountable to doing these, and I look forward to whatever the next one is about. And I just want to, I appreciate everybody who got on here, Seamus and Tiffany and everybody else who watched the stream today. And if you are watching the replay, please also leave a comment. Tell us what if you're in an organization, like where you think you are in the organization, what stage you think you're in. And then, follow-up questions, again, like I said earlier, are like, okay, then where are your clients? Where along this life cycle are your clients? Where along this life cycle is your competition? And what conversations can you lead internally that are productive, and using this model? I'm going to go ahead and turn on the banner. Boom. Look at that. Look at that.
Great job with the banner.
Yeah.
Well, tell everyone how to find you if they want to follow up and connect with you.
Yeah, I mean, if you just go to illustri.us, you can find out a lot more about the work we do. You can click on contact and schedule a discovery call with me if you think that this model or anything else we do might be helpful in your business, or if you just have questions about what's happening. I made the observation the other day that all the work we do is change work. All the stuff we do is somehow related to change management, because whether you're growing or scaling down or merging or re-envisioning your values or deciding on a strategy, all of this is a change. It's just like like a chiropractic adjustment might be where your spine needs to go, but it's also an adjustment that doesn't really feel doesn't feel good, and your body might react. So everything is change within the organization, and so if you need help managing that change, the discomfort in that change, just give us a call.
Great. Thanks so much for being here. It was great to have this conversation with you. And looking forward to the next one.
Cool. Thanks, Sumaya.
Thank you.
Have a great Friday, everybody.